And well, you already introduced Hugo's work, who's trying to conceive of a virtual research environment or an interface where you can actually, as a researcher, navigate all the sources that go into the creation of these 3D models. That's also a nice moment for me to because I forgot to mention that this project also collaborates very closely with Braille publishers and the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision, for which Hugo also conducted some embedded research. I don't think we go into that a lot, but I wanted to mention it nonetheless. It's a very nice partnership. Hugo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. I will now start sharing my screen. All right. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, very clearly.
Yes, okay, thanks. Now, thanks for the introduction, Julia, and very happy here to present here about some of the work I'm doing in close collaboration with everyone else in the project. So seeing how can you translate the research by Swan, by Chiara into interactive interfaces, and how can you also make these usable for larger audiences in a prototype research environment. And yeah, also an important thing here is the interpretation. So I call this presentation interpretative interfaces for 3D historical content. So that's what we're going to look at. First, we take a slight step back. So 3D in the humanities is applied more and more, and of course it has various advantages. For instance, you can engage with complex data objects from all sides, for instance, in a VR environment. You can do more advanced methods of analysis, for instance, spatially analyzing a battle. You can explore issues of human experience. For instance, how was it in ancient times to be in the Colosseum? You can use the modeling itself, as Chiara already indicated in her presentation, as an interpretative and exploratory tool. And it's possible to understand historical and cultural context from 3D models, from 3D environments. Yeah, so we see that more and more scholarly content is produced in 3D. And then, of course, the question is, how can you represent that in 3D interfaces that you could use on different platforms, ranging from PC to a VR headset? And yeah, there's some issues there, as for regular computer interfaces, you have user experience, UX, and user interface standards. You have guidelines, but for 3D content, that is very much less there. So in this presentation, I will look at three different things that are quite important issues in our work. First of all, conveying the complexity of underlying research. Also, Chiara mentioned this already a bit. Personalization and customization in 3D interfaces, and navigation and search. Now, to start with the complexity of the underlying research, we saw already this beautiful image of the Voorhuis as a render. And of course, how do you go from this image, in this case a flat image, to the interaction with the 3D environment that it's derived from? So how can you go from showing only the tip of the iceberg, so in the 3D user interface, to also show all the assumptions and data that went behind it? So the modeling decisions, the uncertainty, and the underlying data. So how can we make this hidden part more visible? Now, I will show a few examples from the web-based viewer that we are developing at the moment. It's very experimental, so things might still change, but you get an idea of how things can work. So using this viewer, you can enter a room in Pieter de Graaf's house. You can go around and look with your mouse different objects, get more information about them. So for instance, we click on the portraits of Pieter de Graaf's parents. And then we get information on the right-hand side, which is derived from the information that Chiara has kept in her research. So for instance, the information about the reconstruction and why it was reconstructed like this, There are several links to other resources, such as the links to the objects in the Rijksmuseum or link to an item in the diary of Pieter de Graaf. There's a category from the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, and in that way you can also filter different items in this room, and associated images. And finally, something, of course, very important that Chiara already mentioned, the uncertainty. So Chiara has made this index, which ranges from 1 to 4, so from very certain to very uncertain, and here you see it as a color code, and you can get additional information on what these numbers mean. So for instance, about the appearance of the object, but also where the object is placed. And I saw this mentioned also in one of the questions in the previous presentation. We also have a way then to overlay this information over the interface that you actually see, so the image of the house. If you click on the analysis layer, you will see the same color codes that Chiara devised on top of the view of the room. Then I move on to the next part of my presentation. So a bit about personalizing and customizing your experience as a viewer. One thing that you can do right now in this viewer is to explore the space with different naturalistic or analytical lighting settings. So for instance, we can select a lighting setting showing candlelight and how that actually appeared in the room, how the objects would be lighted by this light, and you can try out different settings here, and in that way get some idea of the lighting of the room and the placement of the objects. And then if talking about the placement of the objects, you might also want to look at the placement yourself. So what you could do is to select an object here and start moving it around in the space and try out your own arrangement to see if you maybe have a better hypothesis for how everything was arranged. Then finally, regarding this personalization, what you can do along the way, so if you're viewing this space and you have some ideas, is to add annotations. You see the blue annotate button, and then add some notes, some thoughts, some important information, for instance, where this actual table is in the Rijksmuseum and in which exhibition hall. And then move on to the third topic of this presentation, which is navigation and search. Of course, this is a very big topic, and many people have been researching this in 3D spaces. I'll look at two examples. So first of all, the perspective in which you view the room. You can see it from the first person perspective, but also in a kind of dollhouse view to get a different view on things, to get a better view of the context. And of course, we see one room here, but later you would be able to see also the grayscale model for the whole house of Pieter de Graaf and also other houses potentially. And the final thing I'd like to discuss here is the searching and filtering. Again, we see one room here, but you might see the whole house, and that way you have a lot of objects here. So you need a way to filter and search for objects. Here you see an example. If we search for the art and architecture term furniture, if we enter that, we get highlighted all the objects that are matching with that and can get more information about that. Now, these all served as examples of what you can do to allow for more interpretation in interfaces for 3D content. Of course, this is all ongoing work. So I will discuss in a few minutes a bit about the next steps. So one important thing is to expose the linked data structure and also the connections to, for instance, golden agents. So you have the rooms in the Herengracht 573, Pieter de Graaf's house. Then, for instance, the map that we saw in the visualization was created by Lapenius. Maybe we want to view other works by him. Maybe we want to see more objects exhibited at the Rijksmuseum that match what we saw here. or we want to know more about the people who lived there, how they were portrayed in the different paintings, etc. So this is something that we're still working on and that we are going to integrate also in this interface that you saw. Further, there's the integration of the 3D, but also the two-dimensional maps. I've already been working with Xuan to work on interfaces for geodata and combining that with paintings that's derived from linked data. And there's the documentation and the data, so the links to, for instance, the original archive pieces. Finally, in terms of the next steps, what will happen is that we will conduct more usability studies, user studies for PC and VR. Yeah, if you're interested, please let us know. You can try out our prototype 3D user interface in our next study. This will be in December and spring next year. So if you're interested, please don't hesitate and sign up. Of course, you're not obliged to anything. You can still not do it, but we will send you an email by the time we are planning the user study with more details. Now, that brings me to the conclusion. So I showed a bit of how you can open up access to 3D historical content within the Virtual Interiors project, the complexity of the research, how can you integrate that, customizing, personalizing, and the navigation and search issues. And that way we can move towards more interpretative and reflective user interfaces. That brings me to the end. Yeah, there are a lot of text here and references. If you want to see them later, you can also follow the link to the presentation on the bit.ly. And you can, of course, still sign up for the study. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hugo. Very impressive. So the first very practical question is, can you share the link in the chat?
Sure, that is very easy to do. Yes, I'll do it immediately.
Any other questions?
Oops, I have to send it to.
Again, stunned audience, I think.
Yeah, the link is now in the chat. Yes, so this is, we exploit your presence here by inviting you to take part. So Hugo is also, he's not only developing these things, but also testing the user experience. So you can directly help us to improve this thing, so this prototype. Which of course will be made available after the project ends to everyone who wants to work with 3D sources in his or her research.
That's one question. Hugo, did you explore any alternatives to the color-coded system of object certainty?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have, within the project, we have been discussing different schemes. But there's still the plan to test this a bit more and to try different schemes with actual participants in the user study to see what will work best. So this is the thing we have now, but this might still be adapted in the future.